I really did not have any agency as a girl at the time, brown girl. This entire world that I've grown up in America, when you don't see yourself reflected in absolutely anything, that your entire world is revolving around just seeing the supposed greatness of white people, white men, you sort of internalize that and it's like, well, I'm the exact opposite. I'm not only not a man, but I'm not white either. Right. I am the exact opposite. So that my default must mean that I'm inferior. I'm nothing.
Welcome to my first episode of Fearless, Fair and Lovely. In this week's episode, I want to share a message with the world and to my fellow Indians all over the world. We all have agency as brown people, and we should let our voice be heard. We need to build each other up as a community instead of breaking each other down. Join me in a discussion on how we can combat white supremacy, racism, and colorism in Indian communities all around the world. It's time we do less harm and begin breaking cycles in our own communities. I hope you enjoy this episode.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Fearless. I'm Francesca, and today I'm here with Aparna Priyadarshi. Aparna and I first met on Medium. She started following my blog, and I read this article she wrote about Mississippi Masala. I honestly felt her frustration in that article about anti-Blackness in the Indian community, and we'll definitely talk more about it in our interview today. But first, I'd like to welcome Aparna on the show. Aparna, welcome to Fearless. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited.
Well, I'm excited too. So tell us a little bit more about you and introduce yourself to the entire world.
Yeah. So again, my name is Aparna Priyadarshi. I'm 29 years old. I'm currently in Philadelphia. So just a little bit of background about myself. I'm Indian American. I was actually born in India. I was born in New Delhi. And then my family moved here when I was just one. So I've literally lived here my whole life, and we moved around quite a bit. So I've lived in Virginia and like the deep South. That was for 5 years. And then I moved to Indiana. And that was, from like 5 to 14. That was like 8 years of my life, 9 years of my life. And then my family from then, right before high school started, we moved to Philadelphia, and sort of we've been here ever since. But no, like I moved to New York City like 6 years ago. I was working for quite a bit. I was actually in finance before, so I was working for 4 years. And then I transitioned to the public policy sphere. So one thing that I do want to mention just about me is that, I've really been interested in, from a career perspective, in terms of, doing something that, I mentioned I was in finance, and I'm like, I'm really not feeling this, this is not really doing anything that's for the greater good. I really want to move into something that's, socially impactful. And that's where I am now. I'm working in rural development and poverty alleviation. So this is really where I want to be. But, sort of my philosophy has developed a little bit more, about this over the past few years, is like what I'm really doing in sort of my day job is making sure that we are creating a world where we're doing more good, right? We're adding goodness into the world by reducing poverty, by, so my organization I work for is, helping smallholder farmers. So we're literally advancing their lives by giving them economic opportunity. But in my writings, what I want to do is not necessarily talk about the goodness that we can contribute in the world, but how we can reduce harm. And so a lot of my writings are about white supremacy, about, systemic racism, about, capitalism and the harms of those kinds of systems. And so that we can definitely talk about that more throughout this. But just doing less harm is sort of something that I've been really thinking about. And I try to convey that through my writings.
Which is exactly why I reached out to you on Medium. And for everybody out there, I actually emailed Aparna and I said, hey, I want you to be on this podcast. And I could sense the frustration, the anger in your writing. And that's my question for you. Where does that come from? And how do you so eloquently put it in your writing? But I definitely felt it.
Yeah, thank you so much. So this is interesting. So it's not like, I do come across like with this sort of sense of anger and urgency in my pieces. And it's not something that's like, this is like some, predetermined thing. Like I'm going to like really have set this tone, right? It sort of organically came about. And I think it'd be interesting to talk about, how my tone was before and how my approach to social justice was before and how it's sort of evolved. So basically before, like anytime I would read anything in the news about any sort of social injustice, whether it's, war that we're waging abroad, right? Or if it's an issue of police brutality, or if it's like, seeing pictures of starving children in Yemen, like really anything that runs the gamut of social injustice, I would do two things, right? I would sort of seize up and sort of wallow in sadness. Like I would cry. I would just be like, this world is so terrible. I feel hopeless. I feel like I'm just one person out of like not 8 billion people. There's nothing I can do about this. And there was this real sense of like hopelessness and sadness. And so that was the first thing I would do for a really long time. Yeah. And then the second thing I would do is I would always just approach it in sort of this like, why can't we all just get along way, right? It would be this very sort of kumbaya, like, let's hold hands, let's get together, let's be civil. Why can't people just, work things out, right? Like, why can't just there be rainbows in the sky kind of thing? And
why can't we all just get along?
Why can't we all just get along? That was very much like, I was always this person who was very much about love, and I very much am. I wanted to give that disclaimer. I'm very much still a person about love and compassion, empathy, of course. But it's sort of just that approach was, I feel like I have rectified that approach. And the reason I say rectified is that I think that, this idea of civility is sort of problematic to me in the sense that it sort of paints this picture that, there are people of just equal good measure who just can't figure things out, right? There's Black people and white people, and they just can't get along. There's men and women, and they just can't get along. And it's sort of, there's no longer this power structure of an oppressor and an oppressed person. It's just like people are just fighting, right? So that's sort of why I've abandoned this sort of let's just be civil approach. I think it's something that's like, sort of like these moderate sort of politicians will just, preach and boast about, promoting civility. And I sort of, my anger, I think it's sort of in part, it's a backlash to that. It's like, there's nothing civil about, locking kids in cages. There's nothing civil about what we saw with Jacob Blake, right? Shooting an unarmed Black man 7 times in the back, right? Like, and society just seeing that and being normalized to see that and hear that. Like, there's nothing civil about these things. Why are we asked to be civil when we, ask to end any form of oppression? So like a lot of my anger is sort of like literally responding to that sort of like, let's be civil, let's hold hands. And so in my anger, in my writing, I want to convey a sense of urgency, right? I think a lot of the problem and in the South Asian community and just in general, and we can talk about this, is just that there's just complacency and there's apathy, like I think that a lot of people just are like, if this is not affecting me immediately, it's not something I need to worry about. Well, I'm not Black, or I'm not Jewish, or I'm not a woman. So like, this is somebody else's problem. And it's like, no, I think we should get angry about these issues. And the last thing I'll say about this is that I'm not wallowing in my anger, right? Like I'm not just like, really grumpy. I am channeling my anger, in a positive way that I'm hoping makes an impact on people and gets people to really think about these issues.
Talk about being fearless. Aparna, thank you for channeling that. And I definitely felt it as a reader. I definitely felt that anger and frustration about where your stance is. So I exactly knew where you were coming from. And that being said, I want you to talk more about your most recent article that you wrote on Medium. I thoroughly enjoyed it because of many reasons, but I want you to provide the audience with context in that article and just a brief summary of what you wrote about. And I love the title, which is The White Supremacist and I. So go ahead, Aparna, just give us a brief summary on this wonderful article.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm really glad you enjoyed it.
I do.
Yeah, so The White Supremacist and I, this is a piece about an ex-boyfriend of mine, really like, I'd honestly argue my only serious relationship. It was from the time I was 17 to 23. So lasted like quite a long time, 6 years. And, sort of, it was to write about him. He was a racist person, obviously, as evidenced by the title. But so it was sort of cathartic for me to write about him in a form of like my own healing, not necessarily from the relationship. Like it's been quite a while. I'm 29 now, and we ended at when I was 23. So it's been 6 years. I'm healed with the relationship, and the personal qualms and tribulations that I went through with him outside of racism. But no, it was cathartic for me to sort of reflect, on this person and the atrocious things that he would say and do. And I'll talk about that, but it was sort of important for me to write that. And also, not just tell my audience hey, I dated this really racist guy and here are the crazy racist things he said, but also just sort of what's the takeaway, right? And I think the takeaway of that piece is really, this is one racist person, right? There are, like I said, 8 billion people in the world. There are a lot of racist individuals. What we do incorrectly in America a lot of the time is focus on one person, right? Like this person, Ben, I called him Ben in the piece. This person is awful. Like if we could just get rid of these people, if we could just, put them in the out fringes of society, racism will be over. And the problem with that is we stop looking at things as structures and systems that are oppressive towards Black people and other minorities, right? We just start focusing on Trump. We start focusing on Ben, my ex. And what I really wanted to convey in this piece is that, yes, this is an atrocious person who I happen to unfortunately cross paths with in life. But at the end of the day, he's not really worth my time. What is worth my time in thinking about how to combat racism is thinking about the system and the society that created him. So thinking about his parents, right, and the things that they believed in. Thinking about the movies that he would watch, that he would also have me watch. He would watch a lot of war films, for example, that really glorified, American hegemony and, waging wars abroad in the Middle East. What was the, what were the friends groups that he hung out with? What were their views? So sort of looking at the people around him, the culture around him, just being more sort of probing into that, if you will, became more interesting to me in this piece, naturally as I was writing this piece, than necessarily being look at how awful my ex was, and I'm glad I'm done with him, which I am. I'm very glad that I had the courage to step away from this person finally, But yeah, and the last thing I'll say is that, right, when I was 17, I just was not conscious, and we'll talk about it's insidious racism versus overt racism. And in this piece, I talk about how the overt racism, right, the things that he would say that are just so atrocious, and anyone with half a brain can understand that this is blatantly racist, I would very quickly call that out. But then there were other things that sort of slipped past me that when I think about now, it's this is a structure that he fed into. This is a system that he fed into that is racist. And that's the things that at 17-year-olds just slipped past my mind.
Right, correct. And you're writing about it and you're educating people about it. And like you said, it's not just overt racism, right? It's insidious racism. And that is what I truly appreciated in your piece, because you are asking these questions to the audience. And I want to let our audience know how beautiful your writing is and how in one paragraph you can convey so much. And on that, I want to just read a paragraph from your article, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. So here we go. Talking about Ben. One day, Ben and I were talking on the phone, and he told me that he didn't even see me as Indian. To put it in his exact words, "I don't know, you're just white to me." Imagine that. He rejected my brownness so much so that he gaslighted himself into seeing me as a white person. As someone who had never felt any agency as a brown woman, I wasn't outraged by this comment. I interpreted it to be a compliment. And while I wasn't exactly sure what to make of it, I recall subconsciously thinking that it must have meant something good, something positive. In a world in which many of my Indian brethren sought after proximity to whiteness, white was right and brown was just all right. Not only just right, white was also beautiful, as my community had led me to believe too. Surely I must have been beautiful if I was white enough for Ben, whatever that meant. Whew, wow. I mean, there's so much in just that paragraph, Aparna. But I really want you to talk about when you mentioned your agency as a brown woman. I mean, you were 17 when you felt that way. And I want you to tell the audience and how that's evolved, or has it evolved, and how do you feel right now?
Yeah, thank you so much. No, I mean, yeah, absolutely. At that time, right? Like, I really, and of course, this is not is something I was consciously thinking of. It's very subconscious. But now, in reflecting, I realized, yeah, I really did not have any agency as a brown, well, girl at the time, brown girl. And
Mm-hmm.
why? It's because all this world that this entire world that I've grown up in America, there is nothing powerful. Like, I have not seen an image, that's powerful that reflects somebody like me. So,
Mm,
like in all the textbooks that I grew up, studying, they are all about the accomplishments, and the achievements and the greatness, so to speak, of white men. Like
right,
the movies that we watch, the books that we read, just the art that we consume. It's all about, this one demographic. And when you don't see yourself reflected in absolutely anything, that your entire world is revolving around just seeing the supposed greatness of white people, white men, you sort of internalize that and it's like, well, I'm the exact opposite. I'm not only not a man, but I'm not white either.
right.
I am the exact opposite. So that my default must mean that I'm inferior. I'm nothing. So who am
Mm,
I to say that, I'm of the same level as these people, right? Like, this is just very deeply internalized racism, internalized misogyny as well, in that everything that I'm learning, all these, everything from the philosophers we read, the mathematicians, the scientists, the artists, the novelists, everything is about white people, right? So that sort
right,
of like level mental colonization really affects you as a person of color and a female, right?
right.
So how has that evolved? Absolutely. This whole sort of I've been going through this whole like deliberate process of decolonizing myself, and I'll talk about that later. But basically, it's increasing my agency. The more and more I realize, like purposely, I'm trying to recognize the way in which I have sort of fallen prey to the myth of white supremacy, right? In thinking that being told that, you're just white to me is a compliment. I mean, that's somebody that's very deeply internally racist, right? Like, there's no ways that somebody should take that as a compliment. So how I've evolved is that, well, first thing, if somebody said that to me, of course, like, I mean, I don't know if I would lash out, or I don't know how I would react, but it's certainly, I would understand very well that it's not a compliment, that this person doesn't
Mm-hmm.
view anyone who's not white as, as equal, to them.
Right.
So it's definitely involved, but it's very much a conscious process of, unlearning a lot of the things that, I've learned, sadly, in
Mm.
this society.
Yeah. And then now that you mentioned it, so tell us a little bit more about decolonizing yourself, and how do you do it, and what's the process?
So let me first, I just want to define what really I even mean by decolonizing. Really,
Sure.
what I mean by decolonizing myself is basically decentering whiteness. And so basically in America, really, and really, if you think about it, just the entire world, everything that we consume, sort of like if it's a film or if it's a novel or if it's an essay or any really body of work, it's always sort of assumed that it's like the white person, it's from a white person's perspective. So a lot of things that I've
Mm-hmm.
consumed, right, is not from somebody that looks like me, that sounds like me. It's like I'm always consuming things that are meant to be understood as a white person's perspective. So one part of decolonizing myself is making sure to consume things that, are not created by white people.
Mm-hmm.
So that's like engaging in, a lot of just watching films, just reading works from people who are not white consciously, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I
Mm-hmm.
don't have this idea. So I deconstruct this idea in my mind that whiteness is the norm, and thereby whiteness is beautiful, whiteness is better. There's a lot of ways that, so many of us are just colonized to think that, even though we would
Sure.
never, like just saying out loud, like, oh no,
Sure.
obviously we don't buy into white supremacy, but there's actually sadly many ways that we do that we have not realized.
We do. Yeah. I mean, you mentioned it in that paragraph about colorism, right? And thinking your community's told you that white is beautiful and therefore you are beautiful to him because he thinks you're white.
Absolutely. It's like when you see like, your community, trying to lighten their skin, telling you not to go, not to be out in the sun, not to stay out, like, looking outraged when you've been out, in the sun for all day, as a kid, and saying like, oh, you've gotten so dark, by default, even though they don't even need to say the words white is prettier or white. I don't even think I've heard those words ever explicitly from my community. It's literally just, it's so implied, right? Like when you are told that darkness is worse, the natural assumption is that lightness is better. So, it's like we don't even need to be told these things blatantly or overtly to like have this sort of institutionalized, racism within us.
For
like
sure.
It just manifests sort of naturally.
Yeah, it does. And I mean, this reminds me of the article that you wrote about Mississippi Masala. And that article reminded me about living in India and seeing commercials to this skin lightening cream called Fair and Lovely, right?
Fair and Lovely, yeah.
And dark is bad, and it goes back, and you mentioned this in your article as well, it goes back to the caste system, right? Because that's where all of this racism started within our own community in India. So let's talk about Mississippi Masala. I mean, was that the first time you actually watched the movie?
Yeah, it was. It's crazy. Like I just stumbled across this movie and I was just like, this sounds kind of silly. Mississippi Masala, like a relationship between a black guy and an Indian girl. This is just going to be funny. Like I was just like, it's a time pass, as we say, right? A time pass.
Right.
So I'm just like, okay, like whatever. This is going to be like cheesy. But no, I mean, it was so cool. Like obviously it was like supposed to be this like niche film that like I'm sure it's not supposed to be marketed to like this, big Western audience. But I really think like a movie like that's exploring the relationship between, South Asians and African Americans and Africans, is super important. Like we never see these types of dynamics being explored, the historical context behind some of these dynamics, like Indians living in Uganda, right? And why were they brought to Uganda? I didn't even know that Indians were brought to Uganda like in the late 1800s because the British brought them to build the railroad. So like how even just like in looking at this relationship between, our community and the Black community, like there's still colonialism that's like impacted it and impacted our views, our community's views, of Black people, so that movie, even though it was like lighthearted in its tone, it sort of explores these themes and I sort of picked upon it.
Sure. I mean, it happens all the time and, we all see it. I've seen it growing up in India. And how have you seen it, have seen anti-Blackness manifest in your own personal story?
Yeah, I mean, for certain that, and like what with colorism specifically, I was told, as younger, like don't go out in the sun, don't stay out, and it's like, again, right, that nobody is saying don't be Black, nobody's saying like blackness is ugly overtly. Those, I've never heard those words. It's literally just the implication, right? So like a lot of this is insidious. Like that's what a word that I like to use. It's a lot of this is just very like insidious, and that you sort of put two and two together yourself, and it's very harmful. And so a lot of again, decolonizing is like literally working to consciously unlearn these things, that dark is absolutely beautiful, like all shades of colors are stunning, and that's why I'm so happy to see this Dark is Beautiful campaign. Like I think that's so empowering, and hopefully we'll be able to see like a material change in the culture, in our culture. I mean, just in in Indian matchmaking, like that show, like this girl just openly said, like, I want somebody not too dark skinned, fair skinned, like, and this is an Indian American girl, like she's not lived in India, like it's like pervasive in our own community, in the US. So just seeing that stuff it's scary that it's normalized. And just other ways of seeing it is just in terms of dating, right? Like just it's like you think that parents, who've been living here for a while. I'm not speaking specifically to my parents, but just in general, like, you want to assume that they're progressive and they think they're liberal. But, if you brought home like a Black partner, there'd be issues, right? So like, that's something that I've seen is that, they still very much want to, keep things sadly, within the Indian community, and also casteism in a way too, in a way that I didn't even realize, like coming from an upper caste myself, I'm sort of sometimes blinded to these kind of issues, but like I realized that casteism is really pervasive as well. Like saying things like I want somebody to come from a good family, for example, is sort of like coded language for they should be of an upper caste. So like things like that are not necessarily about anti-Blackness, but just about a social hierarchy that's oppressive, is right. Definitely something that I've seen and become more conscious of, in right. our community, and figuring out ways and how to combat it, right?
Yes. And so on that note, how do we combat it? How do we engage in a healthy and a constructive conversation within our Indian community? What are your thoughts on that?
It's hard, like I can't say I have a perfect answer, because it's something that I really actually want to continue brainstorming how to do. It's not something that sure. I've done. I'm not super new to writing about hard hitting topics, but I would say I'm pretty new to like introducing it to my community, right? So like, for example, right. One way I try to do this recently is with the Mississippi Masala piece. I sent it to my mom and she really liked it. And I made her send it to her friends group. So she has this like friends group of like, all these women that she went to college with in India. And, it's a pretty, it can be a controversial piece in the sense that, look, it's really literally calling out ourselves, right, for being racist effectively. So, I knew that some people would not, respond to it well. Like, luckily, it's her friends group. So like people were really receptive, but it spurred a really great conversation. So like, she was showing me like the group chat, basically the responses, and people were being pretty open. This one woman said, hey, like, I'm just going to be honest. Like, I realized in reading this piece that there's many ways I've demonstrated anti-Black behavior. Like she overtly said, like, there's been times where I've crossed the street if I've seen like a Black man, coming, there's just, I forget what else she said, but honestly, like this woman really stood out to me in that she literally said like she sees anti-Black behavior sort of manifest in herself. And then it sort of also opened up a conversation about colorism. There were 2 or 3 women in the group chat who were talking about how they had faced, colorism, by their own family members telling them nobody's going to want to marry you, or, oh, your sister got so lucky, she's so light skinned, what happened to you? And, I've been seeing so many I saw this in my mom's group chat. She was sharing this with me, but like I've just seen so many comments like this, like just, reading a lot of people's stories about colorism. Like, how is this something your own family is saying to you effectively, that you're like undesirable? I mean, it's just mind boggling to me and so heartbreaking to me, that this is like, yeah, it's like, it's one thing to not have faith in I get, the idea that you don't have faith in humanity because people can be really awful, but like, it's extra heartbreaking when it's, your own family members telling that you're so undesirable that you can't get married. Like, it's just really disgusting.
It's disturbing. And it's also like creating this vicious cycle of traumatizing our own community, right? And like you said, it's all internal racism that we don't internalize racism, that we don't even know it's happening. We're not even aware. So thank you so much for educating people about that topic. Thank you so much for being so fearless and writing about it so eloquently in your writing, and sharing it with your mom and her friends, and having and sparking these discussions. I think that's super important. And we all need to do our part to break these vicious cycles of oppression, of colorism, of white supremacy, because we do want to raise our future generation of Indian women and Indian men to be brave, bold, and beautiful, and have these deeper discussions about colonialism. Wow, I am so happy that you followed me on Medium. And I'm so happy that I met you, because you are such a beautiful soul. And this world needs more people like you to help change it, and to break cycles, and to be angry, and to eloquently write about that, and to heal through writing. Oh my gosh, you are amazing. And thank you so much for being here with me and being on Fearless. And I'm so looking forward to our friendship. And everybody check Aparna out on Medium. What's your handle on Medium?
I think it's literally just my name, like Aparna Priyadarshi. Yeah, like my first and last name together.
You should all read her articles. It's really beautiful, eloquently written, and she, is all about social justice, and she's all about raising awareness and educating people about deep-seated issues, not only in the Indian community but in the community that we live in here in the United States of America. So thanks so much, Aparna, for being here. And any last
Thank
words
you.
that you want to?
Well, no, I was literally thinking like, I mean, talking about being fearless, like I'm not even just saying this, like I could not like just put together a podcast. Like I don't think I could do it. So like what you're doing is fearless to me. It's funny, like I think that like how, like maybe me in my articles, like I'm fearless in that way that I'm speaking sort of truth to power to people that maybe people feel uncomfortable saying it. But that's just sort of like that's my space, right? But like it's so funny how like that's I'm cool to do that, but I could not do what you're doing. Like this would be terrifying to me. So like you just finding these awesome people to talk to and like setting this up and just being bold and like putting it on Spotify, like I don't even know how to do that. Like that sounds like crazy intense and like legit to me. Like I don't know. So like you are doing something that like I couldn't do. And I think you should be giving advice to people, honestly, more than me, and like how to be fearless, because this is like freaking awesome. And honestly, I'm like I literally don't think I've seen a podcast by an Indian American woman, like or Indian woman. So like
Really?
you're breaking barriers right now for me. Yeah, literally.
Cheers
Like
to
you
that.
really are. And like the topics, the gender-based violence, like a lot of the hard-hitting topics that you're talking about again are not normalized, right? Like it's all about normalizing things, and you are literally bringing to the fore these really important things that people are not engaging with or not having to deal with because they have the privilege of not having to think about these things. So the fact that you're like putting it in front of people's faces and say, sorry, but you need to think about white supremacy. Sorry, you actually do need to care about gender-based violence and healing, as a brown woman, and in the experiences that we go through as brown women, like we do need everyone to care about it. And like you're facilitating that. So thank you. I'm really inspired by you too. So thank you so much.
Yeah, let's inspire each other, right?
Yes.
And build this community.
Absolutely. Exactly. And I'm looking forward to your pieces too. I love a lot of your poetry as well. Like I've been reading some of your pieces too. So
Thanks.
yeah.
I put a hold on that for now, but I'm gonna continue to write.
Okay, awesome. I look forward to yours as well.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Fearless, Fair, and Lovely. Today, Aparna taught us so many great things, and I really do hope that we take from it. Today, she taught us that 1, it is okay to be angry when we see social injustices in our communities, at work, at home, or even within our own friend circle. It's not okay to take an apathetic stance when there are so many wrongdoings in our own communities, and sometimes it even happens in our backyard. 2, she shared with us the differences in overt and insidious racism and how we should be conscious about our own insidious racist behaviors. 3, we have to make a conscious effort to consume things that are not created by white people and consume all things created by our very own brown communities. 4, colorism is not okay, y'all. It happens all the time within our own communities. We certainly need to do better. We need to channel some urgency in breaking these cycles, begin treating each other with respect, and stop hating on each other. The first step in identifying these cycles is awareness. I have created resources and writing and journaling prompts on how you can identify cycles in your own life, in your own communities, and make a conscious effort to break them down. Join me in having a discussion on breaking cycles of colonialism and colorism by adding me on social media platforms. Trust me, we are going to have so much fun. Until next week, stay fearless.